me.
Bill, yes.
What is the traditional view of why they were written and what they are?
Well, we're speaking about the community that left Jerusalem and went to the desert. And this small community of about 200 people at the most had splits. I mean, we can read from, especially from the Peshach Havakuk that was found here, we can see there was a number of splits inside the movement. So basically it's hard to speak about how big they were. I mean, at the maximum there were 200 people. And they left Jerusalem, and they came from the richest families in Jerusalem. They came from, they were well educated. All of them knew Hebrew, and all of them, some of them knew Greek. We know that the guy who lived in Cave 7 knew Greek, and there were other people who knew Aramaic. And they were studying here for 1/3 of the night. We know from the text that was found here, from the community rule, we know that, we know what they had to do. They had to gather before sunrise when the sun was rising. They had to pray. They had to work for 5 hours. Then they had their lunch break. They continued to work. And then in late afternoon they gathered together. They immersed and they sat down to the community meal, which was the major event of the day. And after, when the sun was setting, they prayed for the second time. And then they had to study 1/3 of the night every night. So we're speaking here of a well-educated group. Now I think it's a young group. That most of the people who left Jerusalem and joined this group were young people. Josephus tells us that when he was 16, he left his family, and for 3 years he was dwelling in the desert. After 3 years, he joined his family back in Jerusalem, his priestly families. Now, there are 3 reasons why those people left Jerusalem and went to the desert. One is dispute over the calendar. The other one is that they felt very bad about the priestly establishment in Jerusalem, and they felt that they're corrupt, they're after money, they're trying to get their money. And the third thing had halachic things. The way that they had kept the law of Moses was different than the rest of the Jews. They were more frum, they were more extreme in the way that they were keeping the rules in the Pentateuch. So those were the 3 reasons why they left here. I believe that the dispute started in the 2nd centuries, in the middle of the 2nd centuries.
BC, you mean?
BCE, yes. The meaning, the whole...
With the priesthood.
The whole argument against the priestly family started in the Hashmonean period. I think around 152, when John the Maccabees became the high priest. I think that that's when they had left Jerusalem and came here. And if I understand correctly, they were here for more than 200 years, between 150 BC until 68 AD, until the Roman army came and destroyed the place in 68. Now, those texts were used to study. They studied those texts. Maybe they sold it as well. Maybe they were making money by copying scroll. But I think the main reason for copying it. Now, I think that the community as community didn't survive the war. The war that's broke in 66 AD and continued until 73 when Masada had fallen. Those 7 years of war. Even if some of them had survived, they felt that the documents hidden here belongs to the rest of the community. So they belonged that even if some of them had survived, they didn't come back and said, we know that there are documents here. Let's go move the stones, go inside and collect the documents. Because the community as a community didn't survive. I mean, the whole notion that sharing property was some kind of resistant against the priestly establishment. The priestly establishment is collecting money for themselves. We're going to live in some kind of a community work. We're going to share property. We're going to live together. So I feel that even if some of them had survived the war, they felt that this doesn't belong to them. It belongs to the group as a whole. And that's why the documents were left here.
Can't you find origins of early Christianity here?
Oh, yes. There are 4 things that we can speak about. The first one is that Jesus was influenced by the scroll, and especially the Sermon on the Mount. There is a famous article that David Flusser wrote called Blessed Are the Poor, in which he shows that Matthew 5 is built on one paragraph in the hymns, in the Thanksgiving scroll. And that the same 4 groups that are mentioned by Jesus in Matthew 5 are mentioned in the same order in the Thanksgiving scroll that was found in the dirt of this cave that we're standing in. That's one thing. The other thing is that Paul, in some of his letter, is quoting the document. There is a famous paragraph in the second letter to the Salonikim, which he is quoting. Speaks about sons of light, son of darkness, and it looks like he's quoting one of the documents that are origin from Qumran. Now, from my point of view, the most exciting thing is that the early church, and here Professor Eisenman is much more expert than I am, but if you read Acts, you can see that some of the things in Acts, like sharing property, like having a community meal, like having an episcope, a mevaker, all those things that are started in Qumran existed in the early church. And we feel, the assumption is, we cannot prove it, but the assumption is that followers of John the Baptist, after John was killed in 29, so either before Jesus was crucified or after Jesus was crucified, some of the followers of John the Baptist had joined the early church. And they brought with them some of the ideas. So when we see similarities, and one of the similarities, one of the important ones, is that when we read Act 4 and 5, we can see that some people were following the disciples of Jesus, and they were willing to share property. But after what happened in Acts 4, after Anita and Shapiro's story, some of them were afraid. So they're still part of the Jesus movement, but they were not willing to give their property to Peter. So what we see here is that the same thing we find in the scroll. Some followers of the teacher of righteousness were sharing property and lived according to the community rule, and some people were not willing to share property, and they were living according to the Damascus document. So even within the movement of the followers of the teacher of righteousness, not all of them were willing to share property and to live near the Dead Sea in such a remote area. So I think that there is those similarities between the early church and what's written in Qumran is very important. And the last thing is the fourth gospel, the Gospel of John. Before the scrolls were found, people thought that John didn't know a lot about what was in Palestine Christianity, that he didn't have good sources. But when the scrolls started to be studied, we saw that most of the things that we found in the fourth gospel are originated here. Some of the ideas, the theology of John, is very similar to the theology of Qumran. So all those four topics, Jesus influenced not directly or directly, and then Paul directly, and Acts, and the fourth gospel, all of them are very important. But if you can go even to smaller issues, like if you read the letters of the Hebrew Sevens and you read something about Melchizedek, and here we have 11Q Melchizedek, one of the nicest scrolls ever found that deals with Melchizedek, and we can show that the way that the figure of